everybody. My name is Kate Bennett. I am representing Children's Hospital of Wisconsin Community Services today. I'm doing this presentation on our WellBeing Framework. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about some trauma and resiliency work we do in our WellBeing program, Strong Families, Thriving Children. I am a PCIT, or Parent-Child Interaction Therapy practitioner with our Community Services program at Children's. And I'm one half of the team that was going to be here today, and unfortunately Robin, who was going to present with me, could not make it. She's nursing a knee injury, so she's chilling out in the heat today. I just wanted to kind of get a very quick introduction from you guys today, maybe just first name, and then let me know what you do here in the county so I can kind of have an idea of the interactions you have with kids and families. So I'll start back here.
Kelly, and I'm a juvenile court intake social worker.
Okay, thank you. Go here.
Stephanie, behavioral health administrator.
Jan, support services manager.
I'll jump up front up here.
Well, I'm Kristen. I work at Mid-State Independent Living. We do a lot with supportive home care, respite care
Great.
for teens and children.
Thank you.
And I'm Brenda, and I work at Mid-State Independent Living as well.
Awesome.
And I'm Jack. I'm a service coordinator for Children's Services at Wood County.
Okay.
I'm Connor. I'm a mental health provider working here in Wood County as well as other counties.
Thank you.
I'm Anna, and I am going to be doing her job as CVR, the airport CVR supervisor.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm presently the airport advocacy bureau
Awesome.
supervisor.
Good team back there.
I'm Hannah, CCS service facilitator.
And I'm Raquel, and I'm also a CCS service facilitator.
Awesome, great. Thank you guys very much. So I'm assuming you guys have all had some exposure to ACEs in some of the trauma-informed care trainings that you've been through. So we're going to touch a little bit on that today, and then what we're doing in some of our programs to work with our kids and families toward building some resiliency. So just some background about Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. There's some really nice facts about the hospital up there. We're the #4 pediatric hospital in the country right now, which is putting us in a really unique position in some of the work that we're doing, especially in child welfare, as we are one of the only programs in the country that has child welfare involved with a major hospital or pediatric hospital system. So what's great about that is it's putting us at the forefront to be able to get a lot of funding to do a lot of research around our trauma and resiliency programs for the families that we're working with. And specifically in our community services department and our Strong Families, Thriving Children team, we have the opportunity now to use a lot of the research that we're using and tie it into the medical care that our kids are receiving. So our vision as a whole hospital and health system at Children's is that our Wisconsin kids will be the healthiest in the country. And to do that, we know we don't only need to treat our children that we're working with, we need to help with preventative care in multiple areas, and we also need to be working with the families. So our caregiving aspect has a lot to do with just offering the nation's best medical care and then providing the best services we can in our child welfare services. Our advocacy programs are just speaking up and protecting our kids and families and doing what we can not only medically, but also within our court and juvenile systems. Our research is all about our medical care and now also about our trauma and how it's impacting our kids and what we can be doing to help prevent ACEs and toxic stress in the communities that we're working in. And then our education is not only educating our parents and kids about toxic stress and trauma, but also informing community and community partners about what we can be doing to change our practice to meet the best needs of our kids and families. So I love this infographic because when we tell people we're from Children's, sometimes the assumption is I'm a nurse or something like that, and I'm going to be talking a lot about healthcare. But when it boils down to it, only about 10% of the health of our kids and the health of just people in general comes from access to quality healthcare. So what we're really targeting in our well-being and strong Families, Thriving Children team is the rest of that 90%. So what's coming from the world around us, what we can be doing to address toxic stress and adversity in home, schools, and the community, looking at what we're born with, so our kids who are born into adversity, to parents who have experienced toxic stress and ACEs, and then choices that they're making. So food, exercise, healthy choices, safety. So we're kind of targeting all of those areas right there and creating programs and education to the community about the rest of those aspects. So this is just some general information that you guys probably have been exposed to before regarding ACEs in Wisconsin. So 56% have one or more ACEs. This was from the ACE study that was done in 2012, the most recent one. So that's looking at things, the highest one being emotional abuse. Those are all the percentages up there. Can you guys see that slide okay? Okay, does anyone have any questions about this just in general? Okay, so we know that prevalence of ACEs is associated with poor health outcomes. So we have some examples down there. Being very dissatisfied with life, looking at those red bars right there, those are the higher ones on the end. Those are families that have 4 or more ACEs that they've experienced. So these are things like emotional abuse, substance abuse in the household, physical abuse, exposure to a domestic violence, having an incarcerated parent or family member, and separation or divorce or loss of a parent. So those are a few of our examples. So looking at prevalence of ACEs here, this is a graphic that we've taken looking at the national percentages of what we're looking at ACE-wise. So kind of pulling out some that are a little more shocking. Being a victim or witness of neighborhood violence, we jump up from a national average of 8.6 to 15.5% in the city of Milwaukee that we've found. So that's almost twice that. Looking at having a parent serve time in jail, that's almost twice the national average in the city of Milwaukee as well. And then the death of a parent is almost twice the national average as well. So what is well-being? Our team has defined well-being as a healthy emotional, social, and developmental functioning combined with a nurturing environment that allows children to thrive into adulthood. So we haven't just made up this definition on our own. You guys probably have your own definition of well-being or things that you've been exposed to, but we've used lots of different things to combine this into what we think is the best way to serve our kids and families. So the key components of our well-being framework are having a holistic approach to the family, so combining the medical care with the nurturing environments. We're providing trauma screenings and functional assessments to our kids and families as they become involved into our child welfare programs, so I will talk a little more about that. We're using motivational interviewing techniques, so all of our current staff within our well-being team are trained in motivational interviewing, and we are starting to get all of our case management staff and those working with our juveniles and adolescents trained in motivational interviewing. How many of you here are trained in motivational interviewing? Okay, so what's great about it is it's rooted in meeting a family where they're at and evoking change talk. So looking at ways that we're talking to families and addressing certain topics, so we're not coming in saying these are things that need to change. We're meeting them where they're at and having conversations with them, getting them to make these decisions on their own and kind of understanding why it's important for them to change. Creating some discussion about ambivalence as to why they're resisting change. And a lot of the families we work with sometimes don't realize that they're kind of stuck in a cycle with their family of things that have been a problem for a long time until we start having these discussions with them. We have discussions with them about understanding the impact of ACEs and toxic stress, so we're very upfront about those things, providing them with very basic reading level information and having discussions about how they were parented, how it's impacting the way that they're parenting their children. And then we're also monitoring progress. So these assessments that we're doing up front with our families within the first 45 days, we're following up at the 3-6 month marks for some of the assessments, and then also at the year mark. And then now that we've been doing this for about 18 months now, we're following up with our families and completing surveys with them to see how it's impacted service delivery to them. And what they feel like has been beneficial for them, and how they feel like some of this motivational interviewing has been helpful to them, their exposure to ACEs, the conversations that they've had, and how working just with an individual on our well-being team has changed how they've been approached in child welfare services. So what's really happening here is with this motivational interviewing and doing all of this progress monitoring with these trauma screenings is that within these first 45 days, our well-being assessors are coming in, doing these assessments, and then informing evidence-based interventions that are going to help develop parent protective factors or help our kids who are experiencing a lot of toxic stress. So I'll talk a little bit more about it, but what we are doing as a result of that is incorporating some of our interventions into our program itself. So one of the interventions that I will touch on later is PCIT, or what I mentioned I'm a practitioner of before, which is parent-child interaction therapy. That's one evidence-based intervention that we are now having in-house that we're offering free to our families. So just a quick slide on some stress and brain development. So we know that some stress is healthy for everybody. It's normal to have some stress in your life. We have positive stress that is associated with frustration and learning how to navigate through situations, or the loss of a family friend or a family member, or just losing relationships when you're a young child is something that would be considered more like tolerable stress. It's a hard situation, and it's something that we learn to work through. What we're talking about when we're looking at toxic stress are recurrent instances of child abuse or neglect, severe trauma, things that are resulting in having triggers where there's a constant fight, flight, or freeze reaction in our kids. And what happens with that is there's a prolonged elevation in cytokines in the brain, and it causes our kids to not be able to come out of those situations. So I'm sure you guys have had a lot of discussion about this as well, but they're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze stage when they're exposed to toxic stress for a very long time. And looking at a primitive brain of a child, if we're stuck in that really young and you have a child who's neglected at a really early age, their brain isn't able to develop appropriately, and they're constantly in the area where everything is a trigger for them. They can't emotionally regulate because their brain hasn't had the capacity to build correctly. And so when we're looking at slides like this is a 3-year-old child's brain. On the left here, you're seeing what normal brain development would be, and on the right, you're seeing what a brain looks like in a child that has experienced extreme neglect as an infant and toddler. So you see in the areas on the top, the brain itself is just smaller. The area on the bottom with the colored slide, that one is just decreased activities in different parts of the brain. And that obviously affects learning, memory, and stress regulation. So something that I always like to mention here is thinking about some of our parents that we're working with, especially in child welfare services in our county, and that I come into contact with a lot. Sometimes they're very angry, they're upset about situations that they're in. There's not a lot of impulse control and discussions that we have with them. And a lot of that ties back. Sometimes we have to have conversations with them about this. If they experience toxic stress as a child and adolescent, and they never had the ability to regulate stress, and their brain didn't have, their frontal lobe isn't formed in the way that they can manage situations and control some of those impulses, sometimes they're quicker to be angry, they're quicker to be upset. So we approach those situations a little bit differently with them. And a lot of the time it is having conversations once we have some rapport built with them specifically about this, and understanding, it's okay that you're upset, we expect that you're upset, but kind of it's a good way for them to understand this and a way to approach it. So the brain and the body, this is just another slide on the survival mode of flight, fight, and freeze. So looking at our prefrontal cortex there, the learning and thinking brain, and compared to the limbic system, if we're not getting those early things built early on and those needs aren't met, it's really hard for our learning and thinking brain to be able to function appropriately. So here's a quick video on building adult capabilities from Harvard. I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but it's really great. So.
The social challenges that face modern societies, whether it's the ability to work productively, to be a good citizen, stay healthy, have their roots in early health and development. A strong foundation in early childhood results in much better and more effective development later. A weak foundation really puts us behind. The most important thing children need to thrive is to live in an environment of relationships that begins in their family, but also extends out to include adults who are family members in child care centers and other programs. What children need is for that entire environment of relationships to be invested in their healthy development. We've shown from decades of testing and interventions that we can improve outcomes. But the magnitude of those impacts is not good enough. Science is now available to help us think about what we might do that would have a bigger impact than the best of what we've done before. So we began to ask, what could we be doing differently? What could we do to be smarter? Children who are at the greatest risk for the poorest outcomes in learning and health and behavior are children who experience a pile-on, a cumulative burden of one after another of risk factors. And then the burden is more than any child could be expected to overcome. So we began to focus on the development of the adults. What could we be doing to strengthen the capacity of everyone who interacts with children? This led us to think about the kinds of skills you need to deal with adversity. These skills of focusing attention, planning, monitoring, delaying gratification, being able to solve problems, being able to work in teams, executive function and self-regulation. They're also the kind of skills you need to create a well-regulated home and school environment in which healthy development and learning can take place. And then brain science started to tell us that differences in those skills start to develop in infancy based on the environment kids live in. So how do those skills get good? Well, if you don't develop them early, how do you develop them later? Actually, you can build them later, because the period of flexibility and plasticity for this part of the brain doesn't fully mature until age 25 to 30. So then the light bulb went on. The reason we're not getting a bigger impact is not because we don't know about how to influence development, but because we're giving information and advice to people who we need to do active skill building with. Skill building by coaching, by training, by practice, but we're not doing that. So we now have developed this theory of change that says we need to focus on the development of the adults who are important in kids' lives.
So try this.
How does that work?
That's a new idea. What the rock?
We need to focus on their skills, their needs, in order for them to be better, more effective parents, in order for them to be better prepared to be employable, which would enhance the economic stability of the family, which is also good for children. Second of all, we looked at many people in preschool programs and child care centers. And we said, what are we doing to build those skills in the providers? They need skill building as well. And also the community can help to build and reinforce the capacities that they receive. And the community also includes programs in which people who work in the programs have sufficient skills. Third of all, what are the major sources of toxic stress in this community, and how can we reduce that? And moving it up to a policy level, how are our policies strengthening communities' abilities to reduce sources of toxic stress and caregivers' abilities to provide what kids need? The development of our human capital is our future. The development of a productive workforce is our future. The development of a healthy population is our future. This kind of future orientation is critical for a healthy society. It's critical for a thriving business. It's critical for a successful environment of relationships to raise children. It's all about being able to plan for the future, to have a future. And that's why this is so important.
How many of you have seen that video before? Yeah, it's a great video, isn't it? It makes a lot of sense. It's just the big picture as a community, we can do better. We're providing, it's just been history that we provide resources to a lot of people and hand out papers just like that, give skills but don't actually teach them, and that's a huge problem. So that's something as part of our well-being assessment program. We're doing child assessment and we're doing parent and caregiver assessment. So within those first 45 days of us becoming involved with families, we're talking to them about their basic needs first, looking at things that, do they have housing stability? Is there intimate partner violence that we need to be aware of that we aren't currently aware of? What were the adverse childhood experiences that the parent faced? What kind of toxic stress were they faced with as a child? How has that impacted how they're functioning as an adult and how they're parenting their kids? We're looking at their protective factors and their strengths and how we can enhance those, and then areas where we need to build up upon. And a lot of the time they are having very open conversations with us about things that they're doing as a parent that they wish they weren't doing as a parent, but it's just something that how they were parented and they've kind of fallen into that trap of doing that. And many decide that they want to try something different. Looking at the kids and the child assessments, so we're talking about reasons of removal. We're doing developmental screenings for our really young kids, so we're doing ASQs for all of our kids. We're doing child behavior checklist screenings and different types of trauma or childhood experiences surveys with them as well. We're looking at protective factors that the kids perceive from their parents, and then we're just doing other mental health screenings with them as well. And all of this is to inform what types of interventions will work with each individual child and family. So what we have found as a result of doing our well-being assessments over the last year and a half, so this program has been newer with our families, and we started doing assessments in February 2015. Our FCMs on there are family case managers who are working with families where children have been removed. We're looking at their reports of the ACEs and the families that they're working with and the parents that they're working with versus those of the ACE data from Wisconsin. So looking at ACE prevalence, we have 43% of the parents that we're working with have 4 or more ACEs when they are starting out with us coming in at 45 days. That's what we're reporting. So, and most of the parents that we're working with, I want to say about a little over 80% are meeting with our assessors and actually going through the assessments with them, and they're very, very open with them about this information. It's done in a format that isn't very fill out checkboxes survey based. It's very conversational, and so since all of our assessors are trained in motivational interviewing, they're getting a lot of that information just through conversations with parents. So this one's just a further breakdown of looking at specific ACEs that have been reported through these assessments with our case managers. So looking at the top one right there, sexual abuse, 25% are reporting that they've experienced sexual abuse versus the 11% in the ACE study with Wisconsin. Looking at parental incarceration, that's a huge one. 33% have had a parent that has experienced incarceration, which is a really high number. That's a third right there. And then household violence or a family member with mental illness, also 33%. We don't have Wisconsin data available for neglect, but again, that one's very high, and just going down the list, very, very high. Parental separation or divorce, that's right there with an absent parent too. So looking at that, we have a lot of people who are coming into our program that have only had one parental stable figure in their life. If that, household member substance abuse is also a really big one as well. It's almost half of the families that we're coming into contact with. And some additional data that isn't on here that we are starting a really big project on right now. We have a housing project going, and a little over 60% of the families that have become involved with child welfare services in Milwaukee County in the last year and a half have experienced some form of homelessness within the last year and the time that they were involved with us. So that could be just identifying as being homeless, staying in a shelter at all, couch surfing, not having their name on a lease anywhere, and kind of living with other people. So that's a really high percentage. And so that's really concerning to us when we're looking at the reasons why we're becoming involved with families. And there's just, it's a huge issue. So we are currently doing some door-to-door surveys in some of the communities in Milwaukee where we have community navigators present through Children's, where they have built up relationships with some of the families. And we've started on this housing project to complete these surveys, discussing access to resources, other concerns that they have. Are there other people living in their homes that we're not aware of? And then in August, we'll be presenting a community cafe and inviting the entire Milwaukee community to come and have discussions with us about things that need to change and resources that they need. This Prevalence of Aces slide is just a really big one. So there's enough kids with 2 or more ACEs in Milwaukee alone to fill Miller Park with an extra 6,000 kids waiting to get in. So that's a lot. And that's looking at where even our kids who are under 5 that we are doing assessments on, there's a good amount of them that already have 3 or 4 ACEs. So the good news is that history is not destiny. We know that resilience is the ability to overcome hardship, and it's developed over time. It can be learned, and it can be developed at any age. So it's flexible. It's not you're either resilient or you're not. It's something that can be built. And so that's something that's really important when we're working with kids and families. Is it's not this child is never going to be able to manage themselves. This child is not going to be able to get through situations. We can work with them on being able to develop resiliency. So we think of it as kind of being on a scale. So we're working to decrease risk factors, so exposure to violence within the family and community, decreasing toxic stress and exposure to toxic stress, and all adverse childhood experiences, and working at the same time in our programs and in our referrals to interventions to create strong parent and child connections. Connections to competent and caring adults, and executive functioning skills, building those up and actually teaching kids and parents good parenting skills and how to use calming techniques and meditation and things like that to be able to build up these skills within themselves. Another great Harvard video.
Resilience is not some magical quality. It's something that really can be built, even in difficult circumstances.
The key active core ingredient to building resilience are the relationships that kids have to others who care about them.
Of course, families play a very important role, but nobody raises children in isolation. We have a huge amount of research to show the powerful impacts of teachers, coaches, other adults in the community with whom children have a chance to develop relationships, who play that critical supportive role of building resilience. As a result of responsive interaction, children build simple skills of coping and adapting. How to stop crying, how to regulate your behavior, being able to defer gratification.
You have an adaptive toolkit that allows you at moments of stress or challenge to bring out a number of potential skills that allow you to get through it.
As children get older, the sophistication of those skills increases. Being able to monitor situations, solve problems. The way we as a society can nurture the development of resilience is to help communities to pay more attention to building the capabilities of the adults who care for children and provide the supports they need to tip the scales toward more positive life outcomes.
And then communities say, we want to be an active part of crafting the solution to really understand what's necessary to produce the resilience. That's when the ball gets rolling.
Resilience building, capacity building, is really in everyone's interest, and everyone reaps the benefits when we do that well.
Harvard has some really, really great videos on child resiliency and a lot of new articles that they're publishing. So I would encourage you guys, if you're interested in learning a lot more about it, to read some of those as well. Kind of thinking about that, if you have any examples, does anyone have any examples of how you feel like you might be building resiliency with kids and families that you work with in some of your programs? You're probably doing it and you don't even realize it. Even having conversations with kids, asking about feelings, getting them to communicate that is something that's really huge. And the research is showing now that one of the best ways to build resiliency with kids and really work on getting them to have good outcomes is having one stable, caring adult in their life. So if that's a coach, if that's a teacher, if that's a foster parent, if that's a biological parent, a grandparent, it doesn't matter. If they have somebody stable in their life, they seem to build resilience and be able to cope better in a lot of situations.
I would say, I mean, we certainly try to help families and kids expand their social networks.
Absolutely.
Find positive relationships for the parents, for the kids. Also just trying to help kids have small successes and
Absolutely.
things that can build their confidence and new experiences and things like that.
And those are great examples, because one thing that we talk a lot about is our kids struggle a lot with sometimes just behaviors in general, and they don't get a lot of positive praise for good behavior or attention, and that's not something that they're used to. And when they do get it, they battle a little bit. So if we can start building up on some of those smaller successes, that's great. And thinking about connections to the community, that's really important, because some of our families don't identify having any community support. So fostering what they do have and kind of expanding those and building on their interests. Many are kind of stuck in communities that they're in or stuck within their family, and they don't have access to resources or know what's out there. So that's a great example, especially when we're fostering things like church relationships, any type of spiritual relationships, just other parents, meeting parents in the community, meeting anyone who's had a similar experience as them. It's really important. So a short list of protective factors that we have as a guideline for our WellBeing programs is we're looking to have effective parents and caregivers for our kids, making those connections to other competent and caring adults, like you mentioned, working on building up those executive functioning skills for our adults and adolescents, developing positive beliefs about the self, and starting this out with the really young kids that we're working with all the way up through all the adults and parents we're working with. Talking about their beliefs that their life has meaning, fostering any spirituality, faith, and religious affiliations, playing off what they have for socioeconomic advantages and working to have them have resources in areas that they're struggling in. In Milwaukee, this is such an issue for us. I don't know that I've ever worked with a family that hasn't been struggling financially or dealing with a poverty situation or with access to food or housing resources. Fostering pro-social relationships with competent peers and friends, having effective teachers in schools. So what we're taking with our WellBeing programs now is trying to find ways that we're using some of the evidence-based interventions and start incorporating those into our schools. Our schools are very overwhelmed in not only in Milwaukee but across the state with kids that have a lot of behavioral issues. There's not enough resources for teachers. There's a lot of kids in classrooms. What can we do to be making those classroom situations easier and actually meeting the needs of kids who are struggling? And then building safe and effective communities. So providing evidence-based interventions and information to the community at large, and helping them understand how individual communities, individual neighborhoods, individual blocks can help foster parent relationships with their children. So in addition to our WellBeing team doing adolescent and parent assessments, we're focusing on adolescent well-being. We have a team that actually works specifically on that and is out in the community working with kids that are involved in our child welfare program, teaching them basic things like cooking classes, sex education in the classroom, taking them out to do just for interactions with each other if they are having issues socially. Our family finding program on our team is when we have kids who come into our child welfare services, they're looking very extensively for family throughout the entire country, using lots of different types of searches to try and locate any types of family members that could be involved with the family to help foster some of those relationships. Parent-child interaction therapy, or PCIT, is what I do. I'll touch a little bit more on that in a second. We also just recently started becoming trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. which is another evidence-based intervention where we're working with children ages 3 to 18 right now and a parent or caregiver. So they're very, very involved in a time-limited program where we're addressing trauma very directly. So we're doing PTSD screens and trauma screens up front, having a child identify very specifically any types of trauma they've experienced, or having the parent identify that, and there's a lot of gradual exposure involved. So we're directly talking with them about things that have occurred in their lives. And our well-being assessment team is what I have been discussing, and then Wendy's Wonderful Kids, where we're looking for homes for children who have been on the adoptive list for a very long time. So our PCIT program at Children's, we work with both biological parents and foster parents or any caregivers for children. The age range that I target is ages 2 to 7 in our program. Has anyone heard of PCIT before? It is, it's very new to Wisconsin within the last couple of years. There are only a handful of us in the state that are trained, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago that it had been started to be used with foster parents or caregivers or any children that are involved in child welfare services. It's a program that's split into 2 parts that's rooted in play therapy. We work a lot with the parents on enhancing relationship skills, kind of following the child's lead while they're playing with toys in clinic sessions. We do sessions both in home in a clinic and in the clinic, but you can kind of see in that picture that the individual that's coaching, the practitioner, has a headpiece on and is behind a one-way mirror. So the parent and child are in another room, and we are not in there and not involved in the session, but we're coaching them on all the play therapy skills that we're teaching them. Once the parent gets really, really good at that, and we see some really good improvement in just general skills like being able to praise a child very well, ignoring some negative behaviors, we move into compliance training and then working on some specific discipline techniques in the clinic as well. And so most of the referrals that we get are for kids who have very severe behavioral issues. A lot of kids that are being referred because it's thought that they might have ADHD, but we're finding out it's a lot of trauma symptoms. So attention issues, a lot of aggression, a lot of anger, and then we get a lot that there's just an issue with just interactions between the parent and child or the caregiver and child. And some of that often comes from, we have parents tell us all the time, they were never played with as kids, they don't know how to play with their children. So it's really basic. We're not just giving them information, we're not giving them parenting skills. We're literally teaching them and then sitting down with them for an hour a week, coaching them on it, and then giving them homework throughout the week to practice with.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Any successes with kids with like reactive attachment disorder?
Absolutely. There's
this type of
absolutely, yes. And there's a lot of research on that too, and I'm happy to send some of that along. With Megan. What's really great is this targets all types of behavioral issues and things like that. And attachment is a huge issue that we deal with because we're working not only with bio parents and foster parents, but other caregivers too. So sometimes these kids have no connection whatsoever towards a biological parent or caregiver, and there's a lot of attachment issues. So the whole root of the first portion of our program is based on relationship enhancement. So it's really getting the child and the parent to have a good relationship together before we're moving on to anything else. So what's great about our program as well as TFCBT that I mentioned before is both of them are time limited. We're very flexible in how we offer services to families in-house right now, but it's only supposed to take about 12 to 16 weeks. We've made some adaptations, but we want to get them to what we consider mastery of skills. So we work really hard at teaching them skills, and we coach like crazy and get them to practice and then move them on to the next portion. And then we offer booster sessions when they're done. So the 2 things that we really try to focus on is our reunification rates and trying to get our kids home safely quicker, so that we're fostering those positive interactions and parents are parenting safely. So we have a lot of families who they were kind of at their wits' end with child behaviors and couldn't manage it. So there's physical abuse allegations and concerns about how they're disciplining their kids. So we're teaching safe and effective ways to discipline during these sessions. And then for our foster parents or for our other caregivers is for placement support, we're looking at moving our children less. So if there's a disruption in a placement and they're considering that the child needs to be removed from their home because they cannot manage the behaviors, we're kind of getting in there and starting to work with them a little bit as much as we can, as quick as we can. And what's great about it is some of our preliminary data for the last 2 years now is showing that about 92% of our kids have had 1 move or 0 moves since we've started working with them in their foster placement if they've finished throughout PCIT. So that's really big for us, knowing that on average a lot of our kids have had a lot more moves than that. So looking quickly at the adolescent well-being, they're assessing our adolescents to determine individual needs of youth ages 12 to 21, looking at data to see where and program outcomes to see where our kids are really needing help, and having the adolescents actually identifying that themselves. And then we're incorporating now trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT. So what's really great about that program is it's not just therapy for a child. It's not just a trauma therapy for a child. We're having a supportive adult involved. And this, again, it could be a parent, it could be a caregiver, it could be a wraparound worker involved, or a case manager involved, or just a social worker that's involved with the child. But if they know them well and the child is identifying that person as a supportive adult, we'll have them involved in sessions. So we do some sessions conjointly, and we do some individually, but this is kind of the process that we go through. We provide psychoeducation about trauma to the parent or caregiver and child. We teach, if it's a parent, we're teaching them parenting skills. We're teaching the child and parent relaxation skills, affect modulation skills, and cognitive coping skills. And then we move into the meat and potatoes, which is a trauma narrative for a child. So right up front, we are gradually exposing them to trauma that they're discussing and being very vivid about how we're discussing those traumas. And the goal is to get them to create a trauma narrative in their own words. It could be done with writing a story, through pictures, depending on the age of the child, and then having a witness for that trauma narrative. So that would be the supportive adult that's identified. Sometimes it's not the same person that's involved through the whole process, we're finding. We're meeting the kids where they're at and letting them identify who's the best person to witness that trauma narrative for them. And then for the last portion, we're doing a lot of conjoint youth and caregiver sessions as well. And then talking a lot about enhancing safety. So I would say the bulk of the kids that we're working with right now are adolescents and teens who are A-balling a lot and are running away and making really bad decisions. So we're working with them right up front on how to make better choices about that stuff and addressing those traumas. And we're seeing a huge decrease in a lot of some of the areas where they're identifying trauma triggers and some of those issues that they're having in those situations. So we're doing assessments at the beginning, middle, and end of this one as well. And then I'm just throwing this up there because we incorporate, I'm running short on time here, but we incorporate a lot of meditation and mindfulness into our programs now as well. So we teach calming techniques during TFCBT and during PCIT sessions to our kids. Every age is a little bit different in how we teach them. So we teach them ways to breathe, progressive muscle relaxation, things like that. And then a lot of our teens that we work with have cell phones now, so we always encourage them to download some of these apps as well. These mindfulness and meditation apps, they're great for you guys to get to. I love them. We use them in our office as a team all the time too, and sometimes before meetings we'll have like a quick 2-minute just kind of calm down with meditation apps. So it's nice, it just kind of helps bring people back into their body a little bit. So a lot of our kids, when they're experiencing toxic stress, they kind of dissociate a little bit, or they don't really feel themselves in their body. So it's getting them to kind of learn to be in their body a little bit more. Here's my contact information down here. Janella is my direct supervisor, so hers is up there. This is our WellBeing website. We have our information about adverse childhood experiences, and then there's the website down there for Harvard Center and the Developing Child, where there's a lot more information about resilience. And do you guys have any additional questions? I know we're running a little short on time. So I threw a lot of information at you. My cards were back there. If you guys have any questions specifically about our programs, I'm definitely more than happy to share specific program information. I didn't bring any handouts today just because I didn't know how many people would be here, but I'm going to be sharing the PowerPoint with Megan so that you guys have access to these resources as well. Okay.
I did have one more question.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there, when you're doing PCIT, what if the parent's not quite there yet? Or do you have a sort of philosophy that you just start? Or is there a preparation if the parent's not quite
That's a great question. So motivation is a huge piece of how we kind of screen families to be involved. And even if they're struggling a little bit, or they're not, admitting what they, that they had done something wrong, or they weren't, they had issues with parenting, or they're not quite ready to change or make a change in the way that they're parenting, we use motivational interviewing with them, and we'll meet with them a few times. So if we're doing an intake with them, we go through all the behavioral assessments for the kids. We'll go through some other assessments, and then we use what's called a participant enhancement inventory. And so it's geared towards motivational questions about ambivalence to change. So what's going to, are there things that will prevent them from getting to sessions, to, what is the best way for you to parent effectively? How were you parented? How do you feel about that? We kind of have them rank that, so we're meeting them where they're at a little bit. And so we focus a lot on giving them a lot of credit for changes that we're seeing throughout the process. So as we're coaching them, when we're teaching them parenting skills and different things to use with their kids, and a big example would be giving labeled praises for small good behaviors. We're giving the parent a ton of credit every time we see a change for the child. So it's just kind of showing them that a child is changing and their behaviors are improving because of all of the work that the parent is doing. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but we have a lot of positive responses from parents.
Is that inventory something you can share with us?
Absolutely. Yes, I can. Yep, I will do that. Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I have a question about intake.
Yes.
How do you get parents or families into your program? Or is there like a waiting list?
Are you speaking specifically to PCIT or something different, or the whole well-being assessments?
I was sort of speaking PCIT, but of all of your well-being, I guess, would be a good question.
Sure. So well-being assessments up front, the bigger picture, any family who becomes involved with ongoing child welfare services right now, as soon as the case comes in, we have a well-being assessor assigned. And it's totally voluntary. All of our programs are voluntary to our families. But they are assigned a well-being assessor, and the assessor within the first 45 days of the case coming in is assigned to do all the assessments with the families. The majority of them do participate, and they're gathering much more information than the case managers usually would have just on their own. And it's, I think, a lot to do with the motivational interviewing technique that they're using and the way that the assessments are presented. And they're coming in not saying, this is what happened, we need to deal with a safety issue. It's more of, tell me your story. What are your needs? What can we do to help you? So they're using this information to inform which interventions are appropriate, and then also to develop priorities for the family. So they're sharing that information then with the case manager or assigned parties and saying, we understand that there's safety issues we need to address, but here's what the family actually needs and we need to take care of right now. So if it's a housing issue, we need to take care of that right now. For our PCIT and TFCBT programs, we are getting referrals from case management staff, and then also screening our kids who are testing in the clinical range for the CBCLs. So if we fill out a child behavior checklist as part of a well-being assessment, and they're in the clinical range for externalizing or internalizing behaviors, and there's a lot of concerns there, we might reach out to the case manager and say, hey, we have some concerns here. Is this something that might be an appropriate program for them? Is there an identified caregiver or supporting adult that might be willing to participate? So we have a lot of screening criteria that we use. For PCIT, it's very motivation-based, but we have ways to work around that with the inventory. And if a parent is, struggling with alcohol or other drugs, or is having some mental health concerns, we don't screen them out, but we'll kind of put them on a wait list for a little while, check in with them. If they're involved in treatment, we will still work with them. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? Those are really good questions. I appreciate all of your time today. Thank you very much.